It began without warning. One moment, Solara buzzed with a vibrant, chaotic hum of life. Children's laughter echoed through sunlit parks as they chased each other beneath the shade of towering trees. Vendors shouted over one another in crowded markets, their voices competing with the distant roar of planes slicing through the blue skies. Life was imperfect, messy, but alive. And then the sky broke. A sound unlike anything heard before rippled through the air, a deep, resonant crack, as if the heavens themselves were being torn apart. People froze, their gazes drawn upward as the bright midday sky darkened. The sun's light dimmed, swallowed by colossal shadows descending from the void above. Ships vast, otherworldly, and terrifying in their sheer size pierced the clouds. Their surfaces shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the crimson hue that now bled across the sky. The stars, once distant and untouchable, were blotted out by these invaders. Panic gripped the streets. The once bustling marketplaces erupted into chaos as people screamed and scattered, their belongings abandoned in the dirt. Planes veered wildly, their pilots struggling to avoid the alien monoliths that now loomed over the cities. Children clung to their parents, their innocent laughter replaced by cries of terror. And then, the first beam fell. It was silent at first, a column of light, impossibly bright, descending from the belly of one of the ships. For a fleeting moment, it painted the ground in a ghostly glow. Then came the explosion. A wave of pure destruction erupted outward, vaporizing everything in its path. Buildings crumbled into ash, their foundations reduced to nothingness. Streets cracked open like broken glass. The air itself seemed to burn. In mere seconds, entire city blocks were gone, replaced by smoldering craters. The invaders were called the Jaren Collective. Cold, calculating, and merciless, they had no need for diplomacy or conquest. They were a hive mind, their thoughts and actions unified in a single purpose: extermination. To them, Solara was not a world to be conquered, it was a resource to be consumed, its people nothing more than obstacles in their path. City after city fell. New Lumerus, a gleaming metropolis of glass towers, was the first to vanish beneath the Jaren's devastating beams. Veyron, with its ancient stone bridges and bustling ports, crumbled into the sea. Kael'Stot, a city famed for its sprawling gardens and golden spires, was reduced to ash in the blink of an eye. The destruction was swift, merciless, and absolute. In less than an hour, the great metropolises of Solara were no more. But the Jarans, in their cold arrogance, made a fatal mistake. They believed humanity would scatter like frightened prey, begging for mercy. They did not understand the fire that burned within the hearts of the Solaran people, a defiance as ancient as the stars themselves. It was not born of logic or strategy, but of something primal, something older than fear itself. In the ruins of New Lumerus, the air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning metal. The once vibrant city was now a graveyard of twisted steel and shattered glass. Amid the devastation, a young woman named Kaida Ryn clawed her way through the rubble. Her hands were bloodied, her breaths ragged, but she refused to stop. Beneath the wreckage of what had once been her home, her younger brother lay trapped, his cries growing weaker with each passing moment. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "I'm coming." When she finally reached him, his face was pale, his body pinned beneath the fallen beam. She pulled him free, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face, and carried him on her back through the ruins. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but she pressed on, driven by a single thought: survival. As she stumbled through the wreckage, her foot struck something cold and metallic. She looked down and saw a plasma rifle, its sleek, alien design unmistakable. It was clutched in the lifeless hands of a fallen soldier, his body twisted and broken. Kaida hesitated, her heart pounding. She had never held a weapon before, let alone fired one. But something inside her, a spark of defiance, drove her to pick it up. The Durans found her moments later, their insect-like forms emerging from the smoke. Their eyes glowed a sickly green, their movements unnervingly precise. Kaida's hands trembled as she raised the rifle, her finger hovering over the trigger. For a moment, she thought she couldn't do it. But then she looked at her brother, his frail body trembling in her arms, and something inside her snapped. The rifle's energy core hummed to life, and with a deafening crack, she fired. The beam struck the nearest Jaren in the face, its glowing eyes shattering like glass. The creature crumpled to the ground, its body twitching before going still. Kaida didn't wait to see if there were more. Clutching the rifle with one hand and her brother with the other, she disappeared into the smoke. Across the oceans, in the vast deserts of Karen, the invaders faced another kind of defiance. Torik, an elder of a nomadic tribe, watched from the shadows as Jaren patrols combed the sands. Their movements were methodical, their metallic limbs gleaming under the harsh sun. But Torik knew these lands better than anyone. He had spent a lifetime navigating the shifting dunes, and he knew their secrets. Using smoke and mirrors crafted from polished metal and desert herbs, Torik lured the Durans into an ancient canyon. The walls of the canyon were narrow and steep, their surfaces covered in carvings from a forgotten age. As the Durans entered, their insectoid forms reflecting in the mirrored surfaces, Torik triggered the explosives he had buried beneath the sands. The canyon erupted in a deafening blast, the walls collapsing and burying the patrols beneath tons of rock. In the frozen wastelands of Borealis, where the snow never melted and the wind howled like a living thing, a former prisoner named Varric found his own way to fight. Shackled and abandoned in a tundra, he had escaped his captors only to find himself face to face with a Jaren drone. The creature loomed over him, its spindly limbs clicking as it prepared to strike. But Varric, fueled by years of anger and desperation, fought back. With nothing but the chains that had once bound him, he wrapped the cold metal around the drone's neck and pulled with all his strength. The drone's body convulsed before collapsing into the snow, lifeless. Humanity did not fight with strategy or honor. It fought with raw, desperate fury. For the first time in millennia, the Jaren collective encountered something they could not calculate: chaos. And in that chaos, a spark of hope began to burn. Far from the chaos that consumed Solaris cities, the air in the Andar Mountains was eerily still. The peaks, ancient and jagged, stood like silent sentinels, their snow-covered caps glowing faintly under the crimson-stained sky. Deep within these mountains, hidden among the dense forests and rocky cliffs, a solitary cabin lay nestled in the shadows. Its wooden walls were weathered and cracked, bearing the scars of years spent braving the harsh elements. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, the only sign of life in a desolate wilderness. Inside, Orenvex sat by the fire, staring into the flickering flames. His face, once sharp and commanding, was now lined with bitterness and weariness. His shoulders, broad and strong, slumped under the weight of years spent in isolation. The shadows of his past clung to him like a second skin. He had been a commander once, a leader of Solaris Defense Corps, until his temper had cost him everything. Striking a corrupt general had earned him a dishonorable discharge, and with it, the loss of purpose that had once defined him. He had come to this cabin to escape the betrayal, the shame, and the anger that simmered just beneath the surface. But no amount of solitude could extinguish the fire that burned within him. It was a quiet rage, buried deep, waiting for a reason to rise again. That reason came when the sky turned red. Oren had been chopping wood when he first noticed it, a faint glow on the horizon, too bright and too steady to be the sunset. He paused, his axe frozen mid-swing, as the glow intensified. Then came the sound, a low, guttural rumble that seemed to shake the earth itself. He turned toward the source, his heart pounding, and saw it. The city of Andorra, nestled in a valley far below, was engulfed in flames. The once thriving hub of life and trade was now a sea of fire, its towering spires crumbling into ash. Above it, the gerund ships hovered like predators, their massive forms casting long, menacing shadows over the burning city. Orin's breath caught in his throat. He should have felt fear, or sorrow, or even helplessness. But as he watched the destruction unfold, all he felt was rage. It surged through him like wildfire, burning away the apathy that had consumed him for years. His hands clenched into fists, the axe falling forgotten to the ground. He didn't care about Solara's government, or the defense corps that had cast him aside. All he cared about was the fact that these invaders had dared to destroy his home, his people. And he would make them pay. The next morning, Orin emerged from his cabin, his face set in grim determination. He didn't bother to look back as he descended the mountain, leaving behind the life he had built in exile. His destination was clear, Andorra's ruins. If there were survivors, he would find them. And if there were Durans, he would kill them. The journey was treacherous. The once familiar paths were now littered with debris and the charred remains of the forest. The air was thick with smoke, making it hard to breathe. But Orin pressed on, his steps steady and unrelenting. When he finally reached the outskirts of the city, the sight that greeted him was worse than he had imagined. Andorra was unrecognizable. The streets, once bustling with life, were now buried under layers of ash and rubble. Bodies lay scattered amidst the wreckage, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The air was silent, save for the occasional crackle of flames and the distant hum of gerund patrols. Orin's jaw tightened as he surveyed the carnage. He could feel the weight of the loss pressing down on him, but he refused to let it break him. Instead, he let it fuel him. Over the next few days, Orin scoured the ruins, searching for survivors. What he found were the broken remnants of humanity, outlaws, scavengers, deserters, people who had been left with nothing but the will to survive. They were weary, hungry, and scared, but Orin saw something else in their eyes, the same fire that burned within him. These were not soldiers, but they were fighters. And under his leadership, they would become more. He gathered them in the remains of an old warehouse, its walls scarred by gerund beams but still standing. There, he spoke to them, his voice steady and commanding. "They think we're broken," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "They think we'll run and hide, that we'll beg for mercy. But they don't know us. They don't know what we're capable of when we're backed into a corner. We are not prey. We are not victims. We are the Forge." The name stuck. What began as a ragtag group of survivors quickly transformed into a militia. They were poorly equipped, their weapons scavenged from the ruins, and their training was minimal at best. But what they lacked in resources, they made up for in determination. Under Orin's guidance, they learned to fight as a unit, to think like predators rather than prey. They set traps, ambushed patrols, and struck fear into the hearts of the Durans. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity was fighting back. The Durans, ever calculating, soon took notice. One night, as Orin stood watch outside their makeshift camp, a strange sound filled the air. It was not the hum of a ship or the crackle of flames, but something far more unsettling, a voice. Cold and emotionless, it echoed through the night, its words resonating in Orin's mind as if spoken directly to his thoughts. "Surrender now, and your species will be preserved as specimens. Resist, and Solara will burn." The message was clear, a warning meant to instill fear. But Orin only smirked, his hand tightening around the hilt of his blade. He turned his gaze to the sky, where the faint glow of a Jaren ship could be seen in the distance. "Come and try," he muttered, his voice low but filled with unwavering resolve. It was not a challenge. It was a promise. The battle for Solara had become a storm of fire, blood, and defiance. The Jarans, with their cold precision and overwhelming power, rained destruction upon the planet. Cities crumbled, forests burned, and oceans boiled under the relentless assault of their beams. Yet amidst the chaos, humanity refused to be extinguished. Like embers scattered in the wind, they ignited wherever they landed, burning with a fury that no invader could predict. In the ruins of Kael'Stadt, where golden spires once reached for the heavens, the city now lay in shattered silence. The air was thick with ash, the streets littered with broken glass and twisted metal. Among the wreckage, a group of teenagers moved like shadows, their faces streaked with soot and grime. They had once been students, their days filled with books and laughter, but now they were soldiers of necessity. They had found the drone 2 days ago, its alien body half buried in the rubble of a collapsed tower. Its sleek, insect-like frame was scorched and bent, but its core still pulsed faintly with life, a sickly green glow that cast eerie shadows across the ruins. The leader of the group, a wiry boy named Lian, crouched beside it, his fingers trembling as he worked to pry open its control panel. "Careful," whispered one of the others, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of Jaren patrols. "If it wakes up." "It won't," Lian interrupted, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "Just keep watch." Inside the drone's guts, wires coiled like veins, sparking faintly as Lian worked. His hands were steady despite the fear gnawing at his chest. He wasn't a soldier, none of them were, but desperation had a way of teaching quickly. They had no weapons, no training, and no hope of reinforcements. All they had was this drone and the faint, reckless idea that they could turn it into something deadly. Hours passed before Lian finally stepped back, his face pale but triumphant. The drone no longer glowed green. Instead, it hummed with an ominous red light, a makeshift bomb primed to detonate. The teenagers carried it into the heart of the ruins, placing it beneath the remains of a crumbling bridge. When the next Jaren patrol arrived, its towering forms moving with mechanical precision, the teenagers watched from the shadows as the bomb detonated, the explosion ripping through the air with a deafening roar. The patrol was obliterated, their metallic bodies torn apart by the force of the blast. For the first time, the ruins of Kael'Stadt echoed with something other than despair. It echoed with victory. Far away, in the dense jungles of Zinara, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the hum of unseen insects. The jungle, ancient and untamed, seemed almost alive, its towering trees and twisting vines forming a labyrinth of shadows. The Jarans, unused to such terrain, moved cautiously through the undergrowth, their glowing eyes scanning for threats. Their metallic limbs clicked softly against the ground, their movements precise but slow. They didn't see the traps. The guerrilla fighters of Zinara had lived in these jungles for generations. They knew its secrets, its hidden paths, its dangers. And they used that knowledge to turn the jungle itself into a weapon. Nets woven from vines and reinforced with steel dropped from the canopy, ensnaring Jaren drones and dragging them into the depths. Pits lined with sharpened stakes lay hidden beneath the foliage, swallowing patrols whole. Poison-tipped arrows, fired from unseen hands, struck with deadly accuracy, their toxins corroding even the Jaran's advanced armor. One fighter, an elder named Tarak, stood atop a ridge overlooking the carnage. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and unyielding. He held a blowgun in one hand, its surface carved with intricate patterns that told the story of his people. As he watched a Jaren patrol stumble into yet another trap, a hidden tripwire that triggered a cascade of boulders, he allowed himself a grim smile. The jungle was their ally, their shield, their weapon. And as long as they fought within its embrace, the Durans would never claim Zinara. At the heart of the resistance, deep in the Andar Mountains, the forge's base buzzed with activity. The cavernous hideout, carved into the mountains themselves, was a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers lit by the flickering glow of makeshift torches and salvaged lights. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, oil, and determination. Fighters moved through the halls, their faces set with grim purpose. Some carried weapons, plasma rifles scavenged from fallen Durans, or crude blades forged from scrap metal. Others carried supplies, their arms laden with food, water, and ammunition. Kaida Rynn arrived at the base with nothing but the clothes on her back and the weight of her loss. Her brother's death had carved a hollow place in her heart, a wound that refused to heal. She carried his memory like a blade, sharp and unrelenting, driving her forward. When she entered the base, her eyes burned with a quiet, smoldering fury. She found Orin in the central chamber, where he stood over a map of Solara, his brow furrowed in thought. He looked up as she approached, his gaze meeting hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kaida broke the silence. "I want a weapon," she said, her voice steady but cold. "Not sympathy. Not comfort. A weapon." Orin studied her, his expression unreadable. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that burned in his own. She was young, but she was no child. She had seen the worst of the Durans, and she had survived. That was enough. Wordlessly, he reached for a rifle leaning against the wall and handed it to her. It was heavy, its surface scratched and worn, but Kaida took it without hesitation. Orin's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "Welcome to the fight," he said. The Durans, for all their technological superiority, were unprepared for the chaos they faced. Humanity did not fight like a unified force. They fought like cornered animals, wild and unpredictable. They struck from the shadows, using whatever they could find as weapons. They hacked into Jaren systems, turning their own machines against them. They used the land itself, jungles, mountains, ruins as tools of resistance. For the first time, the Durans faltered. Their cold, calculating minds struggled to adapt to the sheer unpredictability of human tactics. They had expected an easy conquest, a species too weak and divided to resist. What they found instead was a fury they could not comprehend, a fury born of loss, of pain, of desperation. And that fury was relentless. Deep within the Andar Mountains, hidden beneath layers of stone and shadow, a new kind of fire burned. It was not the natural flame of torches or the comforting warmth of hearths. This was an unnatural light, cold, blue, and flickering, emanating from the alien wreckage scattered across the massive underground chamber. The forge's engineers, hackers, and rogue scientists worked tirelessly in this cavernous space, their faces illuminated by the ghostly glow of Jaren technology. The air was thick with the sounds of creation, the hiss of welding torches, the hum of alien energy cores sparking to life, and the clatter of tools as pieces of scavenged metal were hammered into place. The chamber smelled of oil, ozone, and sweat, a testament to the relentless pace of their work. At the center of it all stood Orin Vex, his arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning the chaos around him. Before him loomed the skeletal frame of their greatest gamble yet, Vanguard Prime. The ship was a monstrosity, a patchwork of Solaran resilience and Jaren precision. Its jagged hull was a collage of alien alloys and salvaged steel, its surface scarred and uneven, as though it had been torn from the nightmares of the invaders themselves. Wires snaked across its body like veins, pulsing faintly with the unstable glow of Jaren plasma. The ship looked wrong, unnatural, almost alive, but it was theirs. And it was their last hope. The idea for Vanguard Prime had been born out of desperation. The Durans' hive mind controlled their forces with terrifying efficiency, coordinating their attacks with precision that no human army could match. The only way to disrupt that control was to strike at its core. Oren's plan was audacious, reckless even: infiltrate a Jaren refueling station near the outer moon of Narith and upload a virus into their network. If it worked, it would cripple their hive mind, throwing their forces into chaos. If it failed, it would mean certain death for everyone involved. But Oren wasn't afraid of failure. He had already lost too much to fear it. The construction of Vanguard Prime was a monumental task. The Forge's engineers worked day and night, their hands blistered and their eyes bloodshot. They stripped the wreckage of fallen Jaren ships for parts, carefully extracting alien components that hummed with dangerous, unpredictable energy. Each piece of technology was a puzzle, its function and purpose obscured by its alien design. The scientists, many of whom had been outcasts in Solar's academic circles, pored over the devices with a mixture of awe and frustration. One such device was the ship's power core, a pulsating sphere of Jaren plasma encased in a translucent shell. Its surface shimmered like liquid light, its energy so potent that even standing near it made the air feel heavy. It was unstable, volatile, and far beyond their understanding. But it was also their only chance. "We're playing with fire," muttered Dr. Illyra Voss, one of the lead scientists, as she adjusted the core's containment field. Her voice was tight with exhaustion and fear. "If this thing goes critical..." "It won't," Oren interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. His gaze was fixed on the core, his expression unreadable. "We don't have the luxury of doubt, Doctor. Make it work." Illyra didn't argue. She simply nodded and returned to her work, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the controls. The ship's weapons were another challenge. The Duran's technology was far more advanced than anything Solara had ever developed, and integrating it with their own systems was like trying to fuse fire and ice. The Forge's weapons specialists cobbled together a crude arsenal from scavenged parts, plasma cannons ripped from Jaren drones, missile launchers built from repurposed mining equipment, and even a railgun salvaged from an old Solaran warship. The result was a Frankenstein's monster of a warship, its weapons powerful but unpredictable. "It shouldn't even fly," one of the engineers muttered as he tightened a bolt on the ship's hull. "But it will," Oren replied, his voice steady. "Because it has to." As the ship neared completion, the mood in the base shifted. The exhaustion and frustration that had plagued the workers began to give way to something else: hope. Vanguard Prime was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol, a testament to humanity's refusal to surrender. It was ugly, unstable, and barely functional, but it was theirs. And it was proof that they could fight back. Kaida Rynn stood in the shadows of the chamber, watching as the final pieces of the ship were put into place. She had been working alongside the others, hauling parts and running wires, but now she allowed herself a moment to simply look. The ship's jagged silhouette loomed above her, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. It was terrifying and beautiful all at once. "It's incredible, isn't it?" said a voice beside her. She turned to Celien, the boy from Kalestadt, his face smudged with grease and his eyes wide with wonder. "It's something," Kaida replied, her voice soft. She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that might have been hope. The day Vanguard Prime was launched, the entire base gathered in the main chamber. Oren stood before them, his presence commanding as always. His voice carried across the crowd, steady and unyielding. "This ship is more than a weapon," he said. "It's a message. To the Durans, it's a warning: we will not be broken. And to us, it's a reminder of what we're fighting for." Our home. Our people. Our future. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the cavern. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they felt like they had a chance. When Vanguard Prime finally roared to life, its engines filled the chamber with a deafening hum. The ground shook, and the air vibrated with the sheer force of its power. The ship rose slowly, its jagged form casting long shadows across the walls. It shouldn't have flown. By all logic, it should have collapsed under its own weight, its unstable core tearing it apart. But it didn't. It rose higher and higher, until it disappeared into the darkness of the mountain's exit tunnel. Orin watched it go, his expression unreadable. He knew the mission ahead was dangerous, that the odds of success were slim. But as he stood there, surrounded by the people who had built the ship with their own hands, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. And with that hope, humanity's fight burned brighter than ever. Vanguard Prime tore through the blackness of space like a wounded beast, its engines roaring with a feral intensity that seemed to echo the desperation of its creators. The void stretched endlessly around it, a cold, silent abyss dotted with distant stars that flickered like dying embers. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was tense, every breath heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The crew was a motley collection of humanity's last hope, hardened fighters with haunted eyes, rogue engineers clutching their tools like weapons, and survivors who had nothing left to lose. Each of them clung to their stations, their faces pale but resolute. They knew the odds. They knew the risks. And yet, here they were, hurtling toward the impossible. Kaida Rynn sat at her console, her hands trembling as they hovered over the controls. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of the countless lives depending on them. She glanced at Orin, who stood at the helm, his figure silhouetted against the faint glow of the ship's chaotic control panels. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with determination. "Hold steady," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "We're almost there." As they neared the Jaren refueling station, the ship began to groan, its unstable core straining against the forces holding it together. The sound was low and guttural, like the growl of some ancient, dying creature. Sparks flew from the walls, and the lights flickered, casting fleeting shadows that danced across the faces of the crew. Through the viewing screen, the station came into view. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a massive, pulsating entity that seemed more alive than mechanical. Its surface was covered in bioluminescent veins, glowing with an eerie, rhythmic light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The structure twisted and writhed, its tendrils curling and uncurling as though sensing their approach. Kaida felt a chill crawl up her spine. The station wasn't just a machine, it was alive. And it was watching them. A sudden, chilling voice invaded their minds, not spoken aloud but felt, as if it were a thought not their own. It was cold, alien, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Stand down, or be consumed." The crew froze, their eyes wide with fear. The voice was everywhere, inside them, around them, impossible to escape. Kaida clenched her fists, trying to block it out, but it was like trying to stop a flood with her bare hands. Her thoughts felt invaded, her very sense of self threatened. Orin, however, didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his face set in grim defiance. Without a word, he activated the plasma cannon. The ship shuddered as the weapon fired, a blinding beam of searing energy tearing through the void and striking the station's outer shell. The impact sent a ripple through the station's surface, its glowing veins flaring brightly for a moment before dimming. The Jaran's response was immediate. The station retaliated, its tendrils lashing out like the limbs of a monstrous predator. They coiled around Vanguard Prime, their surfaces slick and glistening with an otherworldly sheen. The ship lurched violently as the tendrils began to pull it closer, dragging it toward the station's pulsating core. The crew was thrown from their seats, scrambling to hold on to anything they could as alarms blared and the ship's hull groaned under the strain. "We're being pulled in," shouted one of the engineers, his voice tinged with panic. Oren gritted his teeth, gripping the controls with white-knuckled hands. "Not yet, we're not. RYNN, get that virus uploaded. Now." Kaida nodded, forcing herself to focus despite the chaos around her. She turned to her console, her fingers flying over the keys as she worked to breach the station's defenses. The system was unlike anything she had ever encountered, its code alien and incomprehensible, shifting and adapting as she tried to force her way in. Sweat dripped down her face as she fought against the overwhelming complexity of the Jaren network. Behind her, the ship continued to groan, its core growing more unstable with each passing second. The air inside the cabin was thick with heat and the acrid smell of burning circuits. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, and the lights flickered wildly, casting the scene in a strobe-like chaos. Oren left his station and moved toward the core, his steps steady despite the chaos. The core was exposed now, its translucent casing glowing with a dangerous, erratic light. It pulsed violently, each surge of energy sending tremors through the ship. Oren knew what he had to do. "Keep working, Kaida," he called over his shoulder as he approached the core. "I'll stabilize it." Kaida glanced back at him, her eyes wide with fear. "You can't TULL. Just do your job." Oren snapped, his voice sharp but not unkind. He knelt beside the core, his hands moving with practiced precision as he adjusted the containment field. The energy radiating from the core was almost unbearable, searing his skin and making the air around him shimmer with heat. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. The ship's thrusters roared to life as Oren redirected power from the core, forcing the ship to resist the station's pull. The tendrils tightened, their grip crushing, but Vanguard Prime held its ground, its engines screaming in defiance. Kaida's hands shook as she worked, her vision blurring from the sweat dripping into her eyes. The Jaren network fought back against her every move, its defenses shifting like a living thing, but she refused to give up. Her brother's face flashed in her mind, his smile, his laughter, and then the way he had looked in his final moments. She clenched her jaw, using the pain as fuel. "I'm in," she whispered, her voice trembling. Then louder, "I'm in." The virus began to upload, its progress bar creeping forward agonizingly slowly. The station's tendrils thrashed violently, sensing the intrusion, and the ship shuddered as another wave of energy slammed into it. Oren grunted in pain as the core flared, its light blinding, but he held his ground. "Almost there," Kaida muttered, her eyes fixed on the screen. Come on, come on." The bar reached 100%. "It's done," she shouted, spinning around to face Oren. But her triumph was short-lived. The core was destabilizing, its glow turning from blue to a dangerous, fiery red. "Oren," she screamed, her voice cracking. He turned to her, his face pale but calm. "Get to the escape pods," he said. "Now." The ship shuddered violently as the virus took hold, spreading through the Jaren network like wildfire. The station's vanes flared brightly, their glow flickering erratically before dimming. The tendrils loosened their grip, falling away as the station began to convulse, its massive form writhing in agony. Kaida hesitated, her heart pounding. "I'm not leaving you." Oren met her gaze, his eyes filled with a rare softness. "You have to. This isn't just about us. Go." Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to move, stumbling toward the escape pods as the ship began to break apart. The last thing she saw before the doors closed was Orin, standing tall beside the core, his figure bathed in its deadly light. And then she was gone, hurtling away into the void as Vanguard Prime unleashed its final roar. The virus moved like a shadow, slipping through the Jaren network with an unnatural speed, unseen but deeply felt. It wasn't just a program, it was a weapon forged from the rawest parts of the human soul. Encoded within its digital veins were the emotions that defined humanity: fear, rage, grief. These feelings, alien to the Jaran's cold, logical hive mind, tore through their systems like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. The station's bioluminescent veins, once pulsing with a steady, rhythmic light, began to flicker erratically. The glow dimmed, then flared violently, as though the structure itself was in pain. The tendrils that had once lashed out with precision and purpose now flailed wildly, their movements chaotic and uncoordinated. The air around the station seemed to ripple, as if reality itself was bending under the weight of the virus. Inside Vanguard Prime, the crew watched the scene unfold in stunned silence. Kaida stood frozen at her console, her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the screen. The virus's progress was displayed in jagged, pulsing lines, but she didn't need the data to know it was working. She could feel it, a strange, almost visceral sensation that sent shivers down her spine. Orin's voice broke the silence, low and steady despite the chaos outside. "It's spreading." The station began to convulse, its massive form writhing as the virus attacked its neural core. The once perfect symmetry of the Jaren structure was breaking apart, its surface splitting and cracking as if it were alive and screaming. A deep, resonant hum filled the void, growing louder and louder until it became a deafening roar. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, a wave of raw, alien anguish that pressed against the minds of everyone on board. Kaida clutched her head, her nails digging into her scalp as the sound threatened to overwhelm her. "What's happening?" she gasped, her voice trembling. Orin's expression was grim. "The virus isn't just disabling them. It's tearing them apart." The Jaren hive mind, once a flawless web of interconnected thoughts and commands, was unraveling. The virus introduced something the Jarans had never known: chaos, doubt, fear. These emotions, so integral to humanity, were poison to the Jarans. Their perfect unity, their unshakable purpose, was crumbling under the weight of feelings they couldn't understand or control. The tendrils that had once gripped Vanguard Prime so tightly now hung limp, twitching sporadically as the station's neural core collapsed. Through the viewing screen, the crew could see flashes of light erupting from within the structure, bursts of energy that illuminated the station's grotesque, writhing form. It was as if the station was alive, and it was dying. Kaida turned to Orin, her voice barely above a whisper. Did we just kill it?" Orin didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the station, his expression unreadable. "We didn't kill it," he said finally. "We broke it." As Vanguard Prime pulled away from the station, the crew began to realize the magnitude of what they had done. The virus wasn't just localized to the station, it was spreading through the entire Jaren network. Every ship, every drone, every node connected to the hive mind was being infected, their perfect synchronization shattered. The Jaren collective, once an unassailable force of nature, was beginning to fracture. Kaida watched the station's implosion from the viewing screen, her hands still trembling. She felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, disbelief, and something darker. Guilt. "They're falling apart," she said softly, almost to herself. Lian, the youngest member of the crew, spoke up from his station. His voice was small, hesitant. "Do you think they feel it? The virus, I mean." Do you think they feel what we feel? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Kaida thought of the emotions encoded in the virus: fear, rage, grief, and shuddered. If the Durans could feel even a fraction of what humanity had endured, it would be unbearable. Oren's voice cut through the silence, firm and unyielding. It doesn't matter what they feel. What matters is that they are vulnerable now. For the first time, they are not invincible. The station's final moments were a spectacle of destruction. Its bioluminescent veins burned brighter and brighter, their light shifting from pale blue to an intense, searing white. The tendrils retracted, curling inward like the limbs of a dying creature. The structure began to collapse in on itself, its surface folding and crumbling as if it were being devoured from within. And then, with a final, deafening roar, the station imploded. The explosion sent shockwaves rippling through the void, a blinding flash of light that forced the crew to shield their eyes. When the light faded, all that remained was a field of debris, glittering like broken glass against the endless black. Inside the ship, the crews sat in stunned silence. The hum of the engines was the only sound, a quiet reminder that they were still alive. Kaida leaned back in her seat, her body trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, but the image of the station's collapse was burned into her mind. Oren stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the debris field. His expression was hard, his jaw clenched. He knew this was only the beginning. The Durans were fractured, yes, but they weren't defeated. Not yet. But for the first time, they had a chance. Kaida opened her eyes and looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. What now? Oren turned to face her, his eyes burning with determination. Now, he said, we finished what we started. And in the cold, silent void, Vanguard Prime carried humanity's hope forward, its engines burning brighter than ever. The virus, now known as the Fracture, spread like a silent plague across the galaxy, its reach infinite and its effects devastating. What began as a ripple within a Jaren station grew into a tidal wave, crashing through the collective's once flawless systems. Jaren ships, once precise and unyielding, faltered mid-flight, their engines sputtering as if gasping for breath. Entire fleets drifted aimlessly, their lights flickering like dying stars. Drones, the perfect instruments of Jaren will, turned on their masters, their cold, mechanical eyes glowing red as they tore through the very beings that had created them. Across the galaxy, chaos reigned. Jaren commanders, beings who had never once questioned their purpose, now hesitated. Doubt crept into their minds like a poison, unraveling their millennia-old unity. For the first time, they experienced the fracture of thought, the dissonance of individuality. Orders were given, then rescinded. Battles were fought without strategy, their cohesion shattered by the virus's insidious grip. The collective, once a seamless and invincible machine, was falling apart. But the Durans were not defeated. Not yet. In the heart of their crumbling empire, they summoned their ultimate weapon, the Harbinger. It was a warship unlike any other, a colossal beast forged from the darkest corners of their technology. Its surface was black as the void, absorbing all light and giving nothing back. Tendrils of energy coiled around it like serpents, crackling with power that could annihilate entire planets. The Harbinger was not just a weapon, it was a declaration. A promise of total annihilation. When word of the Harbinger reached Solara, the last human stronghold, the resistance fell silent. Fear rippled through their ranks, a suffocating weight that pressed down on every soul. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Humanity's survival now hung by a thread, and that thread was fraying fast. In the Vanguard Prime, Kaida stood at the viewing screen, her reflection ghostly against the stars. She watched as reports flooded in Jaren ships malfunctioning, drones rebelling, commanders faltering. It should have felt like a victory. But all she could feel was dread. Orin joined her, his presence steady and grounding. "They are coming," he said simply, his voice low and calm. Kaida turned to him, her eyes searching his face for something: hope, reassurance, anything to hold on to. "Do you think we can stop it?" "The Harbinger." Orin's gaze was distant, his jaw tight. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we'll die trying." The battle above Solara was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Harbinger loomed over the planet, its massive form casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the light of the sun. The air crackled with tension as humanity's scattered fleet gathered, their ships battered but unbroken. This was their last stand. There would be no retreat, no surrender. Inside Vanguard Prime, the crew prepared for the fight of their lives. Kaida's hands trembled as she adjusted the ship's systems, her mind racing with calculations and strategies. Orin stood at the helm, his expression carved from stone. Around them, the Resistance fleet buzzed with activity, their comms alive with voices, some calm, some frantic, all determined. The Harbinger struck first. A beam of energy erupted from its core, a blinding lance of destruction that tore through the void and obliterated 3 Resistance ships in an instant. The explosion lit up the darkness like a second sun, and the screams of the fallen echoed through the comms before cutting off abruptly. "Stay focused," Orin barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "We knew this wouldn't be easy." Vanguard Prime dove into the fray, its engines roaring as it weaved between enemy fire. The Resistance fought with everything they had. Missiles streaked through the void, plasma beams lit up the darkness, and ships collided in desperate, fiery explosions. The Harbinger was relentless, its tendrils of energy lashing out like whips, tearing through the Resistance fleet with terrifying precision. Kaida worked furiously at her station, her fingers flying over the controls as she coordinated the fleet's movements. "We need to hit its core," she shouted over the chaos. "It's the only way to bring it down." Orin nodded, his eyes locked on the monstrous ship. "Then we'll give it everything we've got." The Resistance's ingenuity and courage turned the tide. They swarmed the Harbinger like a pack of wolves, exploiting every weakness, every opening. Kaida's virus, modified and weaponized, was uploaded into the warship's systems, disrupting its defenses and buying the fleet precious seconds. Vanguard Prime led the final assault, its weapons blazing as it tore through the Harbinger's outer shell. The ship shuddered under the strain, its hull groaning as explosions rippled through its body. Inside, Kaida and Orin fought side by side, their determination unshakable despite the odds. As the Resistance delivered a killing blow, the Harbinger let out a final, deafening roar. Its core erupted in a blinding explosion, a cascade of light and energy that consumed the warship and sent shockwaves rippling through the void. The Resistance fleet scattered, their ships battered but alive. When the light faded, the Harbinger was gone. All that remained was debris, floating silently in the cold expanse of space. The victory was hard-won and bittersweet. The Resistance had suffered devastating losses, and the scars of the battle would linger for generations. But humanity had survived. They had faced the unthinkable and emerged victorious. On Solara, the people celebrated, their cheers echoing through the cities as they looked to the skies with hope. For the first time in centuries, the shadow of the Durans was lifting. Humanity, battered but unbroken, had proven that they would not be extinguished. But in the quiet aftermath, whispers began to spread. Whispers of something older, darker, watching from the void. The Durans had fallen, but the galaxy was vast, and its secrets ran deep. Orin and Kaida, now legends among their people, stood together on the observation deck of Vanguard Prime. The stars stretched out before them, endless and unknowable. This isn't the end, Kaida said softly, her voice tinged with both fear and wonder. Orin nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. No, he agreed. It's just the beginning. And as the ship's engines roared to life, carrying them into the unknown, the dawn of a new era began. Humanity had reclaimed their place among the stars, but the void still whispered its secrets, waiting to be uncovered.